Welcome to Chapter 1. Let's see. How fun is this class going to be? I don't know. I know it's a lot more fun in person to teach culture, intercultural communication. But we're going to have to do the best that we can. One thing that you have to remember is every week, almost every week, I will post a discussion. Week 1 discussion, da-da-da-da. And you need to reply to it. Majority, not the majority, but a good part of your grade comes from those conversations. And if you don't post to them, you're only hurting yourself. What you get out of this class is what you put into this class. And we're going to talk about intercultural communication and how culture and communication are connected, especially in this first chapter. And what you need to understand is basically the earth is a collective of cultures coexisting. We'll get a little bit more into that as we go into this chapter, but there are different cultures not only around the world, but there's different cultures in your community. And we all coexist. And although we're all related, according to DNA, they can trace back everybody's mother to somebody a couple of thousands of years ago in some far place in Africa, and we're all related. And if you believe in different Christian beliefs, then we're all related. We're brother and sister. So why is it that we are all related and we have different cultures? And that can be found by understanding culture. Now, I worked on a counseling major as well, and one of my favorite authors, or group of authors in that, was a trio named Sue Arredondo and Mac Davis. When they explained culture, they explained it to me in a way that I could understand it. I'm going to share that with you right now, and then we'll talk more about this chapter. But a shared reality can be fabricated by subtle nuances, more so than a shared language sometimes. A view of reality can be created from cultural differences such as gender, age, socioeconomic class, ability. All those things affect culture. But according to Sue Arredondo and Mac Davis, published in the Multicultural Dimensions of Counseling, they divided culture, or the development of culture, into 3 different areas, or 3 different dimensions. Dimension A is something that we have no control over. I like to call it the given. Family, social influences. They can't be changed. You know, where you were born, the family you were born to, the religion that family practices, the diet that family eats, the weather of that area, you can't change. Dimension B is work, school, friend. I call it the variables. Work, school, friends, things you select. You know, your first friends were probably selected by your parents to hook you up at a play date with somebody else because they like that parent, and they get together and you kids play together. Or maybe one of your neighbor's friends and you grew up in the same neighborhood. So you had a lot of the same cultural start, shall we say. But when you get older and you select your friends, you start getting an influence from oftentimes some other culture. And when you explore different religions, you get a cultural influence from the exploration of other religions. When you explore fields to be employed in. You know, I don't know how many of you, your first job was your perfect job, and that's the one you've been with and you will always be with all your life. If you do, you're kind of lucky in some aspects and kind of unlucky in others because you didn't get to experience something else. But the things you select, where did you decide to go to college? Some of that had an influence from your parents because they may have been the ones paying for it. Did you join the military right away? Did you go see the world? Did you travel? Did you study abroad? All those things are the variable part of culture. And finally, their last dimension was eras or events. For my mom, it was Pearl Harbor, World War II. I'm not that old, okay? My first memory is Kennedy's assassination that I can put a timeline on. The Vietnam War was my era. And many, probably older than you, was the 9/11. It changed our perspective in many aspects. Major events like that can have a cultural impact. So, as I told you once in the introduction, that culture is like a rubber band ball. Different layers change your cultural perspective. So, what does that have to do with this class in communication? Communication is culturally dependent. Culture is dependent on communication. They're interwoven with one another. And it's important to build bridges to span the cultural abysses as opposed to building walls. If you want to understand other cultures, if you want to be understood, you have to be willing to take that chance. You have to be willing to reserve your thoughts and put them aside and allow somebody else to present theirs. And by allowing that to happen, I'm not trying to convert you to a different culture. Don't get me wrong. Because everything that you have so far, you're going to carry with you. But I'm trying to get you to be open to understanding other people's perspective on culture. That's what's important. It's important to understand your cultural perspective is no more right than somebody else's. What somebody else grew up believing, their cultural perspective, it's right to them. And yours may seem foreign. And theirs may seem foreign to you. It reminds me of a story I heard a long time ago. In every argument, there's his side, her side, and the right side. And each one of you can be 100% right in your perspective of your culture. But you need to be willing to respect other people enough to allow them to have differences. That's what's important. To agree to disagree, to understand that my culture may not be the right way, and yours may not be the right way, but they're right for us. They're right for me. Christmas, United States, Christmas Eve, Santa Claus comes sees us, right? In Germany, the kids put their shoes outside the door, and before Christmas, Sinterklaas comes and brings candy and puts it in their shoes. If they've been good, cold if they haven't. Sound familiar? A little different, but in the United States, if it's my birthday, the people I work with may get together and get a card and sign it, and maybe they'll take me out to lunch, maybe they'll have a cake in the break room for my birthday. In Germany, my secretary showed up one day with a cake. I said, "Oh, what's the cake for?" She says, "My birthday." I said, "Okay." In their culture, if it's your birthday, you bake the cake and you bring it to work, share with your friends. If I did that here, if I brought a cake into work and said, "Everybody's my birthday here," everybody thinking, "Well, isn't he arrogant? What if I don't want to celebrate his birthday?" Is one right or one wrong? They both seem fine to me. You got to be open. So, in the textbook, Cannadine, Cannadine, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right or wrong, but I give it a shot. He identified what he calls 6 regulators. Now, a while ago I told you about Sue Arredondo McDavis said there was 3 dimensions, and inside the dimensions there was a bunch of different things, each one. Well, this particular communication course narrows it down to 6 regulators, but each one of them can be subdivided many different ways if you look at them closely. The first one is religion. Religion helps create your cultural perspective. It can affect all the elements of your life, not only from the rituals at birth to the rituals at death and everything in between. Nation. Nation is much more predominant now, although religion was the earliest one that he defined. And people's nationality brings a lot of play into, quote, their culture. Now, nationality, and back up to religion, it can be divided into, the many different religions. There are over 5,000 different versions of Baptists. So, not all the Baptists have the same culture. Not all the Baptists are the same. Now, multiply that times all the other religions. Nationality, or nation, is something we hear often. Patriotic. I believe in my country. Okay, great. I'm patriotic. I believe in mine. I get a lot of my cultural beliefs from the country I was raised in. But what you have to understand is a lot of times people in the same nation have different cultural perspectives. And we're going to talk about those particular things later on. But class. Many people say, well, there's no classes in the United States. And yeah, there are. There's the haves and the have-nots to begin with. The rich and poor. Many people have felt that they were a second-class citizen because of their race, their ethnicity, their gender, and all those things other things we're going to be talking about. But class in this particular context is more like the continent of India, or the country of India, caste system, where you had the upper class and the lower class. Now, we used to at least have in the United States the upper, middle, and lower class, economically anyway. But now we have an upper, and everybody else. But everybody else is still divided. Let's see, where were we? Gender. One of my favorite theories is the feminist standpoint theory. And it says basically that you see the world the way you do because of how the world has treated you up to this point. And I'm a 61-year-old white guy. I have a bunch of friends that are different nationalities, different ethnicities. But another friend of mine, this is a 61-year-old white guy, he and I don't see eye to eye on much anything because we have different perspectives. You're going to have to hold on just a second. My apologies, folks. I will try to remember to get the thing turned off, but it doesn't help sometimes. So, where was I? Gender. Just because two people are the, quote, same, does not mean that they are the same. And the feminist standpoint theory of communication basically says that women see the world differently because women are treated differently. One thing that the book points out is that they've had difficulty finding one norm for women. Because, a lot of the older white women might be the same, but they're not the same as the younger white women or the middle-aged black woman or the Latino woman that's middle-aged or older, because there's so many other cultural variables that change it. And then we have gender differences. A lot of people have different sexualities. They believe they see the world differently from their perspective. And so they have a different cultural perspective. We have race. Now, race is something that has divided us since that idiot came up with it, thinking there were four races. And biologically, we were different, and one was superior to the other. And, there's no race gene. Biologically, our DNA says we're human. And just because you are one color or another color doesn't mean that you are better at this than somebody else, or better at that, or smarter, or faster, or quicker. They're different. Why are they different? Because as we spread out all over the world, we changed exterior characteristics due to the amount of sunlight and ultraviolet radiation and other things we got. Is it wrong to say race is a cultural perspective? It's so ingrained in us that it is going to be a cultural perspective. But race basically is something people put together based on biology and characteristics. It doesn't mean you know the person. I have met some wonderful people of all different races. And I know people have thought of me as an asshole from many different races as well. As well, some of them thought I was a pretty decent guy. So, race oftentimes gets confused with ethnicity. A lot of times people use those two words interchangeably. And ethnicity is generally referred to as shared heritage. A tribe is another way to look at ethnicity. These people had the same history. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're of the same race. So culture and identity. One more thing we had to talk about was civilization. Civilization was the last one of the five he listed. And civilization, they looked a long time ago, back when colonialism was a big thing, and these countries were sending out these ships to claim these lands. and they found a land, and they had people living there, but, according to them, they discovered it, and because those people were barbarians. And just because they have civilizations was easily defined back then, see, because they were self-sufficient and sealed off. So as long as they were self-sufficient and sealed off, this group of people grew in a way different than this group of people. But now we have so much communication across these different cultures. Back then, their theory of civilization and culture said that it went from savages to barbarians to civilized. Because one group of people lived in a grass hut, they considered them uncivilized. The grass hut may have been all they needed to stay warm in their area. So, a lot of times greed changes civilization. Maybe they weren't as greedy. Maybe they didn't need as much, so to speak, in terms of creature comforts to be happy. So, is one more civilized than the other? I don't necessarily agree with their theory that, unless you met the current civilization norm, then you were barbarians or savages. A lot of times what we did as a civilized society was barbaric when you consider how we treated minorities and other groups. Maybe we weren't as civilized as we thought we were. Culture and identity. What creates a cultural and community is a community has to be large enough to sustain itself without outside assistance. And before colonialization started and they had all these different communities all over the world, they were doing good. They sustained themselves. Many of them did not, and they became extinct, or they became there was such a small group that their inbreeding, because they didn't have a choice, created specific abnormalities that they were known for. A cultural and identity, a community shares symbols. They share symbols, rituals, values, heroes, and myths. Yeah. How do in Germany, this is my desk. You can't see it, but in Germany, it's a Tisch, a table. Another word for it. It's a shared symbol. A word is a symbol, not necessarily peace. You know, where am I at over there? There it is, peace. Not necessarily peace, but stop. Those are symbols, right? So are words. Dr. Vernon Humphrey means that I've been educated somewhere, hopefully. Sergeant Humphrey is a grade, a rank in the Army, but it's a symbol. And a cultural community shares those symbols. They share heroes. And they share myths. And these rituals, values, heroes, myths, it's transmitted over generations. That's what creates a cultural community. Now, and members also self-describe themselves. When I was in the Army, I was a soldier. Now I'm an old soldier, but I'm still a soldier. And there's nothing saying you can't belong to one cultural group, more than one cultural group at a time. You know, I was a husband, a father, a soldier, a son, a medical equipment repairman, a fisherman, a runner. All those are, words that describe me, and each one of them, I was in a different little clique when I did stuff. I was in a different little group. So speaking of smaller groups, a subculture is part of the whole. One thing the text brings up, and it says that a lot of the, quote, experts don't like using the word subculture because it means that it is below the primary culture. Okay, I can see where you're coming from. A lot of times I think we overthink these things. But according to them, a subculture is subpar, is below the other. Co-culture, existing alongside. We have the American Indians existing alongside the Americans in the United States of America. And tribes have their own sovereignty. So they are coexisting. A subgroup could be an occupation: soldier, policeman, nurse, student. Counterculture, that was something that was popular back in the 60s, and yes, I was around then. Counterculture, you go against the status quo. You know, my parents, my dad was an old soldier, my mom was a Southern lady, And they didn't like long hair on men. I wanted to grow my hair long, and my parents were against it. So the hippie culture of the 60s was a counterculture. You know, anti-war, peace, demonstrations, counterculture. Let's see, microculture. Now, according to this little fine textbook here, microculture is the term that they like using. And, you know, when I first read this article, this paragraph about microculture, the first thing I thought of was, it sounds like it's politically correct. A microculture is a comprehensive term of smaller cultures embedded in larger cultures that do not have the negative connotation of a subculture. So, a microculture. Communication is culturally dependent. Culture is communication dependent. Communication is how we learn the behaviors and how they are regulated. You learn your behaviors from your parents, more often than not, being raised. Little girls wear pink, little boys wear blue. Little boys do this, little girls do that. You want to do this, they tell you no. The only way you can ask to do that is by learning how to talk. So, I want to do so-and-so. No, you're going to go do so-and-so. And if you don't do what your parents say, then you got punished somehow. So that's how they were regulated. Communication is how we interact with others. It is how, and it's not always just verbal communication. You know, when I leave the house, I hate hats. But the doctor said because of my eyes, I need to have one. So I leave the house, I put my old baseball hat on. It says, Retired Army. So I am communicating with everybody that sees me that I'm retired Army. And every now and then I see some other old retired guy. And he looks at me and he has his retired Army hat on, or retired Marine or Navy or whatever. And we just kind of nod to one another. So we have communicated with someone else through symbols, a nod. But we interacted. Culture defines communication. I've said that I don't know how many times so far in this presentation. But you cannot have communication that's not culturally defined. And it's defined in subtle ways, like, what does that mean? Thumbs up. All right, good job. What's that mean? Okay. Do you know what that means in Argentina? It means evil eye. You're crazy. That piece, that also means that in many English-speaking countries. It's defined by culture. When I was in Peru, I was talking about my children. I have a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And the person I was with kind of giggled, and I said, what? They said, well, here in Peru, if we're talking about animals, we use our hand like this. And children, we use our hand like this. So you just described your children as animals. And I said, so you've met them. So both ways we're using a hand to describe something, but one culturally defined by that culture was different than what I did. The book continues to go into Confucian perspective and Western perspective. There's a whole lot more perspectives, but I guess due to space and time, they had to limit it to these two. And they're kind of the broadest. The Confucian perspective on communication is about harmony. And according to Confucius, there were 5 relationships you needed to worry about. Ruler and subjects, which was about righteousness. Husband and wife, which was chaste or virtuous conduct. Father and son was about love. Brother and younger brother was about order. And friend was about faithful. Virtuousness, selfless duty, patriotism, hard work, and respect. That's what it was all built on. The cultural communication was built on those things. Particularism is there is no universal pattern for relationship. And if you read the text, you will read about uncle and aunt and these different things. But when I had a Korean professor, his name was Dr. Yora Jung. And so when I sat in class, I called him Dr. Jung. And one day we were outside, and he said, Fern, I said, what? He said, you're older than me. You can call me Yura. And I said, no, in class I can't call you Yura. Because to him, me calling him Dr. Jung, showing him respect of an elder, wasn't appropriate. Because I was older than him. But to me, calling him by his first name in class was disrespectful to all my classmates that had to call him Dr. Jung. So we made an agreement. In class, I would call him Dr. Jung, and after class, I would call him Yura. and you will notice, if you read much from other countries, or look into different, especially Asian cultures, a lot of times they call somebody uncle. That's not related to him. But any older male is uncle, and any older female is aunt. But they have a different term, and I'm not going to butcher the Korean, Japanese, Chinese languages trying to pronounce their different versions. Role of intermediaries. Third parties are common. Why? Because saving face is important. So if you have a conflict with somebody one-on-one, then you may insult them or they may insult you. But if you have an intermediary, a third party, then you can save face and they can save face. Reciprocity. Staying even. If they owe you a debt, I hate these generalizations, to be honest with you. By saying if they owe you a debt, who the hell is they? But in theory behind this is if you owe somebody a debt, you're indebted to them, then you feel uncomfortable because you owe them. I know that's foreign to a lot of people in the United States because, we owe people all the time and some people don't matter. But reciprocity is important. If somebody does something for me, I need to do something for them to stay even. In-group and out-group. If you are introduced to somebody outside your group by somebody inside your group, more often than not, you don't get to know somebody outside your group. And a lot of people said they're just arrogant and they're stuck up and they don't even acknowledge somebody that's not in their group. Well, that's just their cultures. You don't go outside your group if you don't know that person, and somebody you trust doesn't know that person, then you don't need to know that person. I know it's real foreign to a lot of you because we meet people that nobody knows, but we become friends with them. Overlap in personal and public life is often intertwined. In the States, more often than not, you don't mix your work and your recreation. Now, there's some exceptions. Sometimes we have a company softball league or things like that. But most especially with the hierarchy and the working, they don't mix. But in the Confucius cultural perspective, they overlap quite often. Honorifics. That's what I was talking about earlier with the uncle and aunt. It's a name given to somebody or verbiage used when you talk with them to show respect for that person. Many different ways you could do that, like in Russia. When I was in Russia, bye bye was poka poka, but you only said poka poka to your friends. You didn't say it to somebody else. That was das vidanya. So, and if you think about it, you do that all the time with your friends and family members. You talk to them differently than you do, say, to a professor. But honorifics, that's how you respect somebody, either with a title, uncle, aunt, doctor, pastor, sergeant when I was in the Army, sir, ma'am. That's how you honor somebody, by using honorifics. The Western perspective is more mechanical. It described in a mechanical way. You have the source, encoding, message, channel, noise, receiver, decoding, receiver response, and feedback. So how does all that work? Well, if I were giving a lecture in a classroom, source would be me. Pretty simple. Encoding. How am I going to take this textbook and cram it down into something you can get? Message. Intercultural communication. Channel. In this particular case, it's video / audio. If it were in a classroom, it would be lecture. If, when I read this book, it was print. How is it the message sent? Via what channel? What medium? Noise. Noise is anything that interferes with the communication. Noise is not just physical noise because somebody's running a lawnmower outside and you can't hear. If you're sitting in the classroom and it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you woke up at 12:30 and you rushed to get to class, and you were out partying all the night before, and you don't feel well and you're hungry, or even you weren't partying all night before, if you just got up late and you were hungry, that tummy growling when you're in class, interfering with you paying attention, that's noise. Someone sticking their head in the door. If you're watching this in your apartment, and somebody walks by the front of the apartment, you can see their shadow go across the window, and it distracts you, that's noise. Receiver would be you. Decoding, taking whatever this is and putting it in a way you can understand it. Receiver response, oh wow, I didn't know that. Or, I need to make a call. Or, that's interesting. Or, let me file that for memory. Or, that might be on the test. And feedback. My favorite feedback is when I teach a lecture in the classroom. At about, let's say class is over at 10 minutes to 2. At about 20 minutes to 2, I start hearing keys rattle. Students give me feedback saying they want to leave. When communication started, it was 2 people talking. And then long distance communication came from couriers, human couriers, or intermediaries. Everybody that had a question for the king didn't get to go talk to the king. He talked to somebody, and they talked to somebody, and that somebody could go talk to the king. And now we have telephones. Telephones have changed the world. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the landline, he thought it'd be more of a mass communication thing instead of a interpersonal. And at one time we had over like 1 billion landlines in the United States, and we have something less than that now because cell phones have taken over. But a lot of countries, cell phones ruled. They were really bad landline communication because it was so far from one place to the other and such hostile terrain, they didn't have them. And now they have cell towers and cell towers and cell phones. We have more cell phones than we have people in the world. I only have one, but you know, I guess some people are important. They have two or three. So it's changed how we communicate. And from a communications perspective, I don't like a lot of it, especially texting. You know, when I wanted, when I had a relationship with a young person long before I got married, you know, if I wanted to talk to him, I had to go talk to him. If I wanted to break up with him, I had to go break up with him. You know, people are breaking up by texting. Internet. The internet has connected the world. And the primary language is English or American. But that could be changing. Yeah, well, I found it very interesting when I traveled the world and, as a soldier, that everywhere I went, I found somebody that spoke English. I speak a little Russian, a little French, a good amount of German, but I found that everywhere I went, I could find somebody that spoke English. And social media has become the backbone for communication, for lack of a better word. People are on social media all over the world communicating. Sometimes with people they know and sometimes with people they don't know. When Facebook first started, it was, you had to be an academic to get it, but then they opened it up to everybody. And my relatives in Illinois, my wife's family, as soon as they became friends of me, they sent friend requests to all the people I knew, because it was like the more friends you had, the better off you were. I don't do that. If I don't know you, I'm not your friend. Just my perspective. So that's chapter 1. I'll try to keep these things down to something less than 40 minutes in the future. There's a lot of stuff to cover. And I hope it makes sense. Any questions you have, feel free to contact me. Email, text, call. You got my number. And I will see you for chapter 2. Don't forget to post in your introduction as one. And I think that's all we have this week. But yeah, introductions. So introduce yourself to everybody. Bye.